and thank you for joining us today on Building Infrastructure for Cancer and Aging Research. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to provide a few tips for using WebEx so that you get the most out of today's webinar. All attendees have been muted and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A or chat panel and select all panelists or hosts from the drop-down. We will ask them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you need to view live closed captioning, please refer to the Media Viewer panel. A link will also be placed in the chat box. I also want to note that today's webinar is being recorded. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Paige Green.
On behalf of the National Cancer Institute, the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences is honored to present Perspectives on Cancer and Aging, the Arthi Huria Memorial Webinar Series. Arthi, the esteemed leader in geriatric oncology, was serving as our chair of the NCI Cancer and Aging Scientific Steering Committee and actively planning our second think tank when she died unexpectedly last November. To honor her service contributions to the NCI mission and highlight her legacy as an impassioned clinician and researcher, we have established the webinar series to communicate NCI's broad interest in cancer and aging research, that is, from cancer and aging biology to population sciences and policy, and also to prime new networking and collaboration opportunities among researchers and clinicians. Moreover, to honor her passion for mentorship and junior faculty career development, each webinar in our series will feature 2 presentations by scientific influencers at the tenured and junior academic or clinical levels. Today, however, we have reserved this honorific platform for 2 esteemed leaders in their own right, who had the opportunity to be mentored by Arthi and who blossomed into her trusted collaborators and co-architects for cancer and aging research. Many listening will have heard Arthi's personal motto based on the African proverb, "If you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together." And our presenters will show how far Arthi was able to go together with others that similarly held a passionate purpose for improving the care of older adults with cancer before her light joined the universe. I will end my introduction with a quote from The Little Prince because it so aptly describes Arthi's conviction as an oncologist that cared deeply about helping older adults with cancer. "People have forgotten this truth," the thought said, "but you mustn't forget it. You become responsible forever for what you've tamed. You're responsible for your roads." Arthi felt responsible for the health and well-being of every one of her patients. She is quoted as saying, "Love your patients as much as you can. Give them as much as you can with all of your heart. They are in a vulnerable place, and kindness and compassion go such a long way." With that, let us go swiftly together to realize Arthi's vision for improving outcomes for older adults with cancer.
I want to thank Paige for that wonderful introduction. I'm happy to and very honored to be able to start this presentation to provide an overview of Dr. Huria's work. We know that without Dr. Huria, geriatric oncology would not be where it is today. And we, both William and I, William Dale, who will be speaking after me, spent much of our time talking to Arthi about geriatric oncology, about policy, about how to impact care delivery, about integrating geriatric oncology into the cooperative groups, and about integrating geriatric oncology into our annual meetings. And we miss her. We miss our ability to talk to her. It's almost a year at this point, and we remember her deeply, and we'll remember her through this talk. So I'll start by really discussing the impact of Dr. Huria's work, and William and I, William will talk about our next steps, building on what Arthi had started with us in order to continue her legacy. I do think the best way to honor her is to remember not only her, but what she cared about. And as Paige said, she cared about her, and most of her patients were older by her preference. And so if we do want to honor Arthi, it's really to keep moving the field forward through mentoring and through gathering of evidence that can inform care. Oops, sorry guys. So we know that our population is aging, and we know that the largest group of growth will be in the ages over the age of 65 and over the age of 70. And there's going to be a shift to even older patients in the 80-plus age group. And so there's going to be many times where often you'll be seeing patients in their 80s. Most of these patients will be seen in the community, but will also come to tertiary care centers to be seen. And as a geriatric oncologist, it's common that the majority of patients in my clinic are over the age of 80. William and I had the pleasure of working with the American Cancer Society for this paper that was recently published that described again the growing incidence and prevalence of cancer in older adults. And as we can see, the incidence is going to increase at the later years of age moving forward. And this was work that Arthi did with Dr. Smith and others that was published in the JCO in 2009, really being one of the first to describe this growing incidence from 2010 to 2030, and showing that over time, there will be an 11% increase in cancer incidence in patients less than age 65. But for patients older than 65, there will be a 67% increase. And in this study that really described the aging of cancer survivors, we should also remember for survivorship that because cancer is highly prevalent in older adults, cancer survivorship is also prevalent in older adults. And over the next 30 years, we're going to see more and more patients who are survivors of cancer who are over the age of 70. So we know that cancer is a disease associated with aging, and we know that the number of older adults is on the rise, and are we prepared? This was Arthi's mantra, and most of the slides that I present today are from her own work and from the work of her team, who I want to also thank overtly on this call through this difficult time for them being able to support us as researchers and also to support honoring her by providing us with slides that we can present on talks like this. This is the crux of what Arthi cared about. We know that our clinical trials have struggled with enrolling older adults, and this is data from the NCI from a few years ago that showed that there's a high prevalence of patients under the age of 65 enrolled onto older adults, and a prevalence that's about 10 to 25% of patients enrolled onto clinical trials that are between 65 and 74 years of age, but very, very few patients over the age of 75. And when we're talking about cancers such as colon cancer or lung cancer, where 1/3 of patients who are diagnosed with those cancers are age 75 and older, this becomes a significant gap in our knowledge in terms of how to provide evidence-based treatment. We also know from the FDA, from Harpreet Singh, who's also been a superb advocate for cancer and aging at the FDA, that registration trials also don't have a high prevalence of patients who are older, with only about 24% of patients being enrolled that are over the age of 70 and 12% being over the age of 75. And again, the disparity is greatest for patients age 75 and older. Why is considering geriatrics important? Well, like pediatrics, in geriatrics, we care for older adults that require unique skill sets because of aging-related changes in physiology, vulnerabilities to toxicity, dependence in function, and concern about the long-term effects of therapy. And when we think about this across the spectrum of aging, which is what accelerated is really dealing with, we have to remember that the skill sets may not be that different because there's, at the two ends of the spectrum of age, we're dealing with similar constructs. And here's why chronologic age may not be the same as functional age. We know that chronologic age does not always describe physiology or fitness. Here are three examples of people who are older, who are extremely fit, fitter than me and many of my colleagues, doing high quality gymnastics, skiing without skis, or running marathons. And these are the three examples that Arthi often used in her own work to describe fitness of older adults. But what most patients look like aren't that of that extreme fitness. Many of our patients are vulnerable due to needing assistance with daily activities, comorbidities that could impact life expectancy, mild cognitive impairment, limited social support, living alone, transportation issues, multiple medications that can impact outcome, and frailty. And these are the patients that may not have been included onto the clinical trials because generally those older adults who are included on clinical trials are less fit than real-world patients. And so in order to integrate geriatrics oncology, we must consider factors other than chronologic age that predict morbidity and mortality in older adults. These include domains, geriatric domains of function, comorbidity, cognition, nutrition, psychological status, social support, and medications. And these domains are what are collected using validated tools in geriatric assessment. Arthi's legacy is really developing and understanding how geriatric assessment can be used in the care of older adults with cancer. When I was a fellow, Arthi was a couple years ahead of me, had done geriatrics at in the Harvard system, and then was a fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering in oncology, and I was at the University of Chicago. There weren't many of us, and so I would reach out to her for mentorship. One of the ways that she helped me early on in my career was to allow me to open her study at the University of Chicago to test and understand the feasibility of geriatric assessment for older adults with cancer. And so we did a study where she developed the tools or identified the tools that could be most applicable, and we enrolled patients from two sites, Memorial Sloan Kettering and the University of Rochester, that showed the cancer-specific geriatric assessment is feasible for older adults. Older adults were able to complete the questionnaire. The majority of the geriatric assessment is patient-reported. They didn't complain about the length. They found it easy to comprehend, and it was feasible in a busy oncology clinic. Later on, this was the tool that was integrated in many of the Alliance trials and is currently being used in the Alliance for clinical trial work. The next step in Arthi's work was to use a Paul Beeson NIA grant, which was her K Award, to gather junior faculty like me and others at 7 institutions to participate in a multi-site study. So there's 10 institutions. This was the beginnings of the Cancer and Aging Research Group, and William will talk about where the Cancer and Aging Research Group is in our next steps. But one of the first things we did together was to enroll 750 patients to identify factors within geriatric assessment that could predict toxicity. And this research was named a key clinical advance in 2012 by ASCO. And what we found was toxicity is common in older adults starting chemotherapy, but the tool that was developed through geriatric assessment can help risk stratify toxicity into low, medium, and high risk. And therefore, this tool can be used in the clinical decision-making process for chemotherapy for those patients and for providers who are worried or considering toxicity for treatment. We now know this tool is used commonly. We can find it on the mycarg.org website. This is the Cancer and Aging Research Group website that Arthi developed with her team. and people are using this tool at the point of care in clinic with 6,000 hits per month and 16,000 hits per month when we talk to everyone from around the world, 45% with international visitors. The next thing we did together was work with a panel of experts and partner with ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncology, to develop guidelines for how to use geriatric assessment for older patients receiving chemotherapy. And what we found was there was a significant amount of data that showed that geriatric assessment does help identify patients at highest risk for toxicity and adverse outcomes, and that the geriatric assessment adds value by capturing factors that are not routinely assessed in clinical care and oncology. And this evidence base was high, benefit outweigh harms, and the strength of recommendation was strong. Because the data in support of geriatric assessment for inclusion in clinical trials and clinical care is robust in international, multi-institutional, and peer-reviewed journals. There are trials going on now evaluating the impact of geriatric assessment on outcomes of older adults with cancer, and Arthi led one of these trials, which William will talk briefly about during his talk. We have two of these trials through our NCI Community Oncology Research Program, the COACH and GAP trials. There are trials in France and Canada and others that may not be listed here, looking at geriatric assessment models of care and impact on toxicity, survival, and quality of life. So more data forthcoming. We know that geriatric assessment can facilitate communication and decision-making and provide high-quality cancer care for the older adults. And there was no better model for this than Dr. Huria. She believed in this and used this for all her older patients. In terms of solutions to fill ongoing gaps in clinical trials and to provide evidence, Arthi worked closely with the Institute of Medicine, ASCO, through the Cancer and Aging Research Group with CARG, and through the NCI through their accelerated aging efforts. In 2013, the IOM, now the National Academies, provided a summary of delivering high-quality cancer care, charting a new course for a system in crisis, recommending recognizing there's a critical need for research in older adults, with solutions, potential solutions of increasing FDA's authority to incentivize and require research on older adults, and considerations of research design, infrastructure, recruitment of older adults, and reporting of results. The U13 conferences that we did in collaboration with the NIA, we published 3 white papers that look at biological, clinical, and psychological factors that should be incorporated in research, designing therapeutic trials for older adults, and improving the quality of survivorship of older adults. And the biggest gap in knowledge is that clinical measures most relevant to older adults are rarely incorporated into oncology clinical care and clinical trials. Laura Levitt, Harpreet Singh, Heidi Kleppen, and Arthi work closely in a collaboration with the FDA and ASCO in this and published their recommendations in JNCI in 2018 that really, again, recommend increasing enrollment of older adults onto clinical trials, leveraging research and designs and infrastructure that are most appropriate for this population, increasing the authority of the FDA, and increasing clinician recruitment of older adults onto clinical trials. As Paige discussed, the NCI was working closely with Arthi and other investigators to really understand accelerated aging. And so this is most applicable to survivorship. When we're thinking about older adults who receive cancer treatment and live a long time afterwards, what happens with their chronic conditions, disability, frailty, and really thinking about how to identify this risk and intervene. And this paper, the white paper from the first conference, was published in the JNCI by Jennifer Guida and others, where really thinking about conceptual considerations to consider aging as a life course perspective, engaging systems biology, thinking about how to measure physical and cognitive function, with a recommendation to use at least one objective measure when assessing these domains, and methodologic considerations, including older adults onto clinical trials. So in summary, we know that the majority of individuals with cancer are older and that older adults are underrepresented on our clinical trials. We're not including measures that are important to older adults like geriatric assessment, and that there's a need to improve the decision base. ARTHI would look at this as an opportunity for all of us to work together to define and move forward with solutions, and William will discuss solutions moving forward. I will end by recognizing this special issue. One of ARTHI's legacies is the Journal of Geriatric Oncology, for which she was the first editor-in-chief and handed that privilege over to me. We do take submissions that are applicable to older adults, and there will be a special issue that is dedicated to her work that will be published next year in honor of her, with many contributing, including our colleagues from the NCI, and many others contributing personal tributes. So I will hand it over now to my colleague, Dr. William Dale from the City of Hope.
Thank you, Supriya. I hope you all can hear me now. I'm going to walk us through, after that wonderful overview from Dr. Mohili about preparing to move ahead. I will only recognize that I deeply enjoyed working with Supriya and with ARTHI over many years, up until about 2 years ago when I moved to City of Hope and had the privilege of working alongside ARTHI here at City of Hope. She had done an amazing amount of work nationally, but was beloved here as well, and is now on the Hall of Fame here for the number of things she did on, for example, physician wellness that we won't even talk about today. What I am going to talk about today is taking her legacy, both in terms of people, mentoring, and work, and moving it ahead. And the small part I will try to play along with Supriya and everyone else in the geri-onc field to take this work and move it into the mainstream. For those who don't know, I'm the chair of supportive care medicine here at City of Hope. I'm a geriatrician and a palliative medicine doctor. Okay, there, I've got the controls, I think, working now. Okay, so ARTHI would often say that if we want to study aging, then there really isn't a better model than cancer. There's a delicate interplay, almost a dance, between getting older and what happens to the likelihood of having cancer and the other issues of physiology underlying it. ARTHI was deeply interested in both cancer and aging, or aging and cancer, depending on the context. So when we talk about age, cancer, and cancer therapy, there's this constant interplay back and forth between aging, cancer, and this happens at every level. We often focus on the clinical level, as that was where Dr. Huria was focused. However, there's a number of things that happen at deeper levels within the body physiologically, including cell senescence, inflammation, DNA damage, oxidative stress, changes in telomere lengths, all of which are affected by this, and which the accelerated aging paradigm suggests that the issues of aging are just as relevant for younger individuals as these sorts of concerns and problems and issues come up at any age when you have cancer and when we start treating them with cancer-directed therapies. And so cancer therapies need to be thought of in this triangulation between cancer, aging, and this physiology. Again, as we saw earlier, there can be very fit individuals. There can be less fit individuals who are the same age. And all of this can lead to a premature aging syndrome, regardless of when you start the treatments. So what happens when you start to treat this fit individuals with cancer therapies, and how might the aging process be accelerated due to that? And probably the most important issue, the outcomes for older adults are quite dependent on their preferences, and the ability to recover, be functional, and interact with colleagues is at the top of the list, often and perhaps mostly exceeding mortality, survival, and living longer if you're not able to live well enough. So Arthi's central contribution among the many things was developing a tool for predicting toxicity risk in older patients, particularly older patients with breast cancer, done through a series of grants, including an R01 and a grant, another grant from a foundation to identify both the clinical and biological predictors of chemotherapy toxicity focused on women with breast cancer. And this is the protocol, which is straightforward, to do a geriatric assessment prior to chemotherapy, and then follow that with a geriatric assessment afterwards, and then a survivorship cohort, all of which involve blood draws to understand the underlying physiology across a number of institutions that was built off the original 7 from her work with her K Award. The national PI transition has now moved to one of her mentees here at City of Hope, Nina Sedrak, who I have the honor of working with. The head site was at the University of Rochester with another wonderful mentee, Allison Magnuson, who's working with Dr. Mohili and has her own Beeson Award following in Dr. Hurria's footsteps, and a continued collaboration across the 16 sites with manuscripts forthcoming. So, sorry, just getting the controls a little bit. So one of the questions after identifying the ability to predict chemotherapy toxicity is, can we intervene and decrease the risk of toxicity? And so there's another study that has just completed accrual, which is getting geriatric assessments and calculating the risk of chemotherapy toxicity at baseline, followed by a randomization to see if an intervention to identify appropriate referral patterns versus usual care can change the trajectory of those who are at highest risk of chemotherapy toxicities. The accrual has just finished of over 600 patients, and those results will be forthcoming in the next few months. Please stay tuned. The PI for this is another mentee of Dr. Hurria's, Dan Lee. I'm a co-investigator and mentor for Dr. Lee on this project, with a follow-up likely to happen with a different sort of intervention based on what we've learned. Through the Cancer and Aging research site and a number of studies, there's been 4,500 patients at least who have been contributing to cancer and aging research through a series of projects, including identifying biomarkers of aging and chemotherapy toxicities. Each of these are protocols from Dr. Hurria. Studies to understand the cognitive effects of cancer therapy, even at the basic imaging level under MRI with another of her mentees. Studying new cancer treatments in older adults, particularly through the clinical trials mechanism, understanding the needs of patients and their caregivers, and understanding the issues for long-term cancer survivors. These are studies from here, all of which we welcome others to join in the pursuit of this or who want to help. Additional part of her legacy, there are now 30 geriatric oncology studies with this many participants. There's been funding, including K awards, to 13 investigators from NIH grants. And the dissemination, as we heard, through the Journal of Geriatric Oncology, the central journal of the International Society of Geriatric Oncology, for which Dr. Mohili is the lead editor, with publications, including a special issue dedicated to Dr. Hurria, most of whose findings are already available online. paying it forward, if anything, was almost as important as taking care of patients to Dr. Huria. It was mentoring junior faculty. This is the original paper from 2008 from the Cancer and Aging Research Group, which we affectionately call CARG, with Arthi and the original group of mentees who joined her, including Dr. Mohili and a number of others. She also started the Cancer and Aging Research Program here at City of Hope. I came to City of Hope in part to join her in helping mentor locally and nationally, even internationally. I was recently honored to be named the director to follow in her footsteps here with this Cancer and Aging Center at City of Hope, and a number of people here who have helped. I will call out specifically Canlin's son, who's done biostats for almost all of Dr. Huria's studies, along with Mina Cedric, Mark Labarge, and Andy Arts, pursuing clinical trials, basic science, and outcomes research here at City of Hope. So this leads us to the last grant that Supriya, Arthi, and I were multi-PIs on. This was a follow-up to our U13 grant, in which we had a series of conferences and identified the most pressing needs for the field with all of our expert colleagues across the country. This is a R2133 grant from the National Institutes on Aging, and it's designed to reach out across the country, including to those on this call, to work with us in building an infrastructure that would allow anyone interested in this, from the junior faculty level up to senior investigators who would like to incorporate aging or even move their own research program in a new direction through this infrastructure. We're just finishing up the second year, or the R21 phase of this grant, and moving to the R33 phase to help people across the country. We affectionately call it CARING, for the Cancer and Aging Research Infrastructure Grant. With CARG, there's a website, and if you're following the Twitter feed, I've posted it. Supriya and I are leading the CARG calls every other week, including tomorrow, to join geriatric oncology researchers across the country and across the world to help design the best research and clinical trials. It's every Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday mornings here, and this helps us gather together all of those so that we can go together and work together to advance the field without undue duplication, and with a concerted effort to close this gap of knowledge as our population of older adults continues to grow. Here's a screenshot from the website. There will definitely be more to come as we build this, but this is a great place to start if you're just getting interested in the field. The tools in particular are available here if you want to introduce those at your own institution. If you want to know the calendar, and if you want to know other things going on, it's all posted here on the website as a great place to start. It's not the only place for this, but it is a central place. We now have 20 participating institutions that call in regularly. There are 310 members of CARG officially. The only qualification for being there is wanting to take care of older patients with cancer. Nothing else. It's been a very organic development. And we want to put just a little bit of structure into that organic group of dedicated people. We have 30 to 40 people per call on CARG, and we would welcome more. It's a very fun place to share ideas and knowledge, with some subgroups cropping up, including our Young CARG organization that allows new investigators to interact, and a biostats meeting that's overseen from the University of Rochester with Melissa Lowe, a mentee of Dr. Mohili's, and you can there present in more detail some of your work. The Cancer and Aging Research Infrastructure Grant, or CARING, was invited by NIA to use a new mechanism to create significant support to build infrastructure across the country that we hope will be sustainable into the future. Here's our goals, which is to increase high impact research that would allow us to identify older patients at highest risk for adverse outcomes from both cancer and its treatment, to develop interventions. That's the next phase of what we need to do. Having increasingly effective tools for identifying the deficits for older adults. This would allow us to actually improve the outcomes and the outcomes that older adults care about. To mentor the next generation, we have a young investigator board who is helping us, and then to disseminate the findings across clinical practice everywhere, all of which is part of our goals. This is the current organizational structure, just to give you all a sense of who's involved across organizations across the country. And we would welcome more. American Geriatric Society, ASCO, ACS, SIOG, NCCN are all contributing to this effort. And we have people here to help you across a number of areas. We focused on aging assessments, like the geriatric assessment from CARG for chemotherapy toxicity, the development of interventions in at least a few areas, behavioral, psychosocial, and supportive care, along with care delivery and comparative effectiveness, and research methods led by Dr. Sun, and our dissemination and communications core led by John Baylinson. So this is our sequence of events. We've completed year one with a conference and regular teleconferences ongoing to create and solidify the infrastructure. And we're just near the, so to give you a little overview of what we have done, there was a Delphi survey completed, again, led by Supriya, in which we surveyed all of the members of CARG. We reached out to all 261 at the time, and 83 of them completed the survey across the group, from assistant, from fellows through professor levels, to tell us about their highest priority for the field. This is just a little bit of a word map to give you a sense of what was at the top of mind for people and for those who would like to join. Thankfully, geriatric oncology was mentioned, but the need for data and improved data and better data from those trials and studies that Dr. Mohili mentioned earlier in her presentation. The importance of mentorship and ongoing mentorship for people who may be in isolated circumstances without geriatric oncology support at their own institution. Training to go along with mentorship so that people become more skilled in doing the assessments and interventions that are necessary, and other things like decision making that are crucial for older patients who are less fit. Support wherever they are, and how to measure the most important elements, with a whole bunch of other things mixed in. These are just some of the identified barriers, and I won't mention all of them, but you can see at the top of the list are funding support, people needing to find the support in the area, something that's increasingly growing, and that we're thankful to NCI and NIA and NIH in general for calling attention to this across all of the institutions. Mentorship and statistical support, along with time to pursue your interests, also were high on the list of needs. We also asked in particular what the mentorship needs were that people had. And as you look in this list, it's the creation of teams, collaborations, reviewers, and workshops to help people pursue their interest and passion in aging. And the grant itself has been designed to help fill some of those gaps, and to help people fill the gaps at their own institutions as well, in gathering the support necessary. We have a patient advocate board. These days, more than ever, it's crucial to have patient input into building studies, to understanding what matters most to patients. We're lucky to have two incredible patient advocate leaders among the members of our patient advocate board, which numbers 10 people. Beverly Cannon and Margaret Siedenquist lead this group. They meet regularly as part of what's called Scoreboard, which grew out of an earlier grant to Dr. Mohili, with a membership that now has 10 people across a number of states and cancer types. We're always looking for others as people are increasingly looking for patients to help them conduct their studies in a patient-centered way. We do have webinars, and the scoreboard members are available to work with people, although we ask that you respect their time and try to work through the caring group as we identify those who need their efforts or can identify people at your own institutions. So after year one of the grant, we completed our Delphi survey, both round one and round two. We have our junior investigator board and have created these internal cores to help people with research. Our patient advocate board, our calls are ongoing, and we continue to have weekly research calls discussing next steps. So now we're nearing the end of year two, and to just give you a sense of where we are, there's our yellow line as we submit our transition report, with the R33 phase being the time to award pilot grants. I'll call your attention to 8 more pilot grants after our first one, which I'll discuss briefly. So here's our cores. This is the kind of support that we're creating for people and who will be meeting on a regular basis. They include the chairs of the various cores, liaisons from our PI group, including Supriya and I. We'll have another PI joining us in the next few months as we transition, and to help us fulfill some of the support that we've had to compensate for with Dr. Huria's loss. There's a leadership core. There's a measures core, both for clinical and biological aging measures that fit into the accelerated aging paradigm. A health services core, a number of things in the care delivery model can be understood, and we have expertise to help guide that. An analytics core for developing sample sizes to help give consultative advice to those who are going to their own local statisticians to help, and for work with the data sets that we're putting into our registry from the past studies, including Dr. Huria's, and a communications core that will help disseminate this information across the country, again, with leadership, with expertise in aging adults and supportive care, and John Balinson and Dr. Sabaya. So here's our pilot grants we want to mention. The first one has been awarded. I'll talk about in a moment and is ongoing, with pilot grants forthcoming over the years with grant support and the matching funds that provide the opportunity for pilot funding, preliminary data, and hopefully the foundation for gathering funds down the road and continuing to support the mission. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Sorry. All right. Sorry about that. I got a little stuck. So I call attention to the special issue of the Journal of Geriatric Oncology. Papers are now available online. They will be part of a printed edition of JGO to honor and remember Dr. Huria. Junior investigators who attended the first conference that we just described have each written papers to accompany those cores that I just described with their groups, and that are available so that you can read how each of the cores will function, how they're going to work, what they can supply, and supporting anyone who wants to join us for this activity and exercise. A number of people that I've already mentioned. I also call attention, in addition to Tweak Hall, Rawad Elias, and Melissa Wong, who are leading other parts of our cores, and to please read their papers. The first pilot grant has been awarded, which is a personalized prioritization tool for older adults, considering adjuvant chemotherapy. Allison Magnuson and Nina Sedrak are leading the core, in addition to testing a technology mediated decision process to integrate information for these patients facing a tough decision. They will also be testing our infrastructure to run this grant through it and give us feedback on what's working and what's not working. And our goal in the next little while as we solidify the infrastructure in preparing for go live in April is to have all of the necessary staff hired, to have the inventory of aging and cancer researchers updated and made available so that we can reach out to the right people. There's been a rich network of individuals that have grown up through the mentoring that's gone on to date that Dr. Hurry has started, and the establishment of cores through a membership roster and some manuals that we can help with understanding and giving people guidance for the best way to use the cores through the structure and functions that they provide. And then the procedures, upcoming conferences, and a general gathering together of all the energy and efforts into a structure that will allow us to interact even more effectively together through calls, webinars, conferences, and ultimately publications that will summarize the key aspects of this development, many of which through the JGO. And we call attention to our pilot grant 1, which will help us work out the final issues for the later pilot grants. So the cores really have been established, but there's always more to learn. We're working on algorithms to help people who want to come from the outside and join the group and learn what can be done. To, in particular, think of ways to offer consultation and navigation to people through the new the new infrastructure and the website. And ongoing resources are listed there at the right, including our assessments and data collection efforts, some toolboxes of ways to measure and to analyze data for older adults with cancer, and investigators who might be able to work with others who want to join the team and pursue their own investigation. Long term, we would like to have sustainable infrastructure so that when it's time for Supriya and I to continue to pass the torch, there will always be people paying it forward, growing the field until it's just an accepted, normal, necessary, regular part of what people think about when they think about care of cancer patients. Have we thought about the needs for older adults? Have we created enough advisors, sponsors, and help for those who need mentorship of both the large M and small M type? Let me finish up there with a picture from our conference. This is members of our team. These are the investigators who came out to California to join us. We'll be planning another such investigation then. Right at the center of this, of course, is Arthi, and we all want to make her proud as we move forward in using this grant to build the field even to greater heights. And we invite everyone on the call who would like to join us to please do so. This is our infrastructure grant to improve clinical care, just reiterating what our research and aging agenda is. And a quick toast to the future. I will give my own Miss Arthi dearly. This was last time I visited her in her home. This picture was taken by her husband, Dr. Tom Lee, with Supriya and Arthi and I. We were toasting to the future on her back porch where we were all going to retire and rock in our wheelchairs. Karen Muschin from the University of Rochester was joining us, and we are reaching out to all of you. Arthi, as much as she did, would have wanted us to move ahead as quickly as we could as a group, and in many ways both move together and move fast to bring her vision for cancer and aging into the future. And we look forward to working with the NCI, with ASCO, with SciOg, and everyone else, especially those on the call who would like to join us. And I will end with a thank you. Geriatrics and Oncology come together for geriatric oncology, and we would love for you to join us. And I'll end there and thank everybody and ask for questions. I'm not sure if others can
Sorry
hear me.
about that.
Okay, so starting.
Supriya, are you on?
Yeah, I am on.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, I didn't hear the question.
Okay. So the first question is, what do you envision will be upcoming priorities for behavioral and psychosocial interventions for cancer and aging?
William, would you like me to take that one?
Sabrina, why don't you go ahead and I will weigh in if I can, if I have more to add.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's a granular view and then a broad view. So the more granular view is how do we adapt interventions that we know have value for adults with cancer, but may not have been tested in older adults. So although I focused on therapeutic trials, cancer control and prevention trials often don't have a significant proportion of older adults enrolled on them. So we're talking about complicated interventions that require lots of visits for behavioral and psychological intervention work. And those may or may not be appropriate for frail older adults with multimorbidity. And so thinking about adapting some interventions that are already available to more frail older adults is one area. And then when we think about older adults with cancer, the majority of them don't just have one problem. And so how do we integrate an understanding of chronic conditions and disability into the work we're doing with a specific intervention to target a specific outcome? What geriatric assessment allows is multi-component interventions, and we need to really understand better how interventions work together to treat the whole patient and not really study just one intervention at a time anymore, because many of our older adults need multiple interventions. So I personally think those are priorities. I know the NCI values also survivorship and both short-term and long-term survivorship related to toxicities. So thinking through mechanisms of how cancer treatment affects outcomes and then targeting therapy interventions to those outcomes is important.
Yeah, and I would only add to those excellent comments. One of the issues that comes up a lot for older adults and for those treating older adults is on this front are how to make these decisions. So how are you going to decide when someone comes to you with maybe a performance status that isn't quite as good, or who have psychosocial challenges that need to be met? How to include them rather than exclude them in research and in clinical care. We need the research database behind these basic decisions for a care model that would allow us to treat those older adults in the right way. If I could use this as, seeing through the chat, an opportunity to transition and then bounce it back to Supriya. Someone asks about cultural or language issues related to enrolling older adults in research. This sort of calls up an interest area that ASCO is especially pursuing, but so is NCI, on health equity issues at all levels and how older adults fit into that health equity question. So there are efforts, including through the MyCard website, to create language at least appropriate versions of the geriatric assessment so that people can be included and not excluded for language reasons. In a broader sense, it's crucial that older adults sometimes face the double whammy of both being older, but also facing other challenges that other excluded groups face. And we really need to design research for everyone. Most patients of all kinds are not in our academic centers. We can't expect them to have to come here through either technology or other means to reach out to the 80% and other places, offer them access, and come up with creative ways to allow them to consent and enroll in research at the cutting edge. So we'll have the database we need to treat appropriately. So I'll stop talking there and pass it back to Supriya.
I agree. I can't see any questions, so somebody will have to say them.
So the next question is, how would you recommend that early stage investigators get involved in cancer and aging research?
So I can start with that one. I mean, that's a great question. Luckily, our community is welcoming, and I think very accessible to early stage investigators, no matter what background or discipline a person is coming from. We want people to be interested in cancer and aging and to be working with one another to improve the evidence base for older patients. So there are many opportunities for being involved. One is CARG. As William had said, it's very informal. You can email one of us. There is an email address. It's from City of Hope. It's caring at City of Hope, but you can email either me or William, and we'll get you into the right place. You'll get on the listservs. We talk about meetings. We talk about opportunities. There's junior faculty calls. There's also lab meetings that are built into the infrastructure for helping to train and learn. Many of the younger investigators get together at ASCO and at SIOG, which is another great place to go to get involved. And I will say, you know, when William and I first started out with RC, I think we had our finger on most everything that was being done in geriatric oncology with other colleagues like Bill Tu and Heidi Kleppen and Tanya Wilds. There wasn't a lot of us at that point, and so we kind of knew everything that was going on. But it's so nice now to see our so many people in cancer and aging, to the point that there are things going on at every meeting that are related to cancer and aging that people can be involved in.
Great. And a related question, are there other centers or the other cancer and aging infrastructures that are being built in other areas of the United States or the world, or is yours really the one that's being built with investigators from all over?
William?
I can weigh in on this one. So we're absolutely delighted that there's infrastructure being built everywhere. There are specific places that are further along than others, some more clinically based, some of which are research based, and it would take a while just to take a guess at the involvement just in the U.S. There's institutions approaching 20 across the U.S., all of whom have contributed data and who are pursuing geriatric oncology research. If you wanted to expand to an internationally, there's some very robust programs overseas with our French and Belgian and Spanish colleagues who are building in other places. So yes, there's often local resources. We are both sometimes surprised how much is going on that we don't know about each other, and our hope is the infrastructure isn't to point out a couple of institutions, but to allow everyone to work together wherever they happen to be. So if you, again, reach out through the email, we're happy to start connecting the dots to the extent that we know where all the dots are. I did post, I think, to everyone through the chat who's still online, the caring email, caring@coh.org. I'm actually going to go so far as to post it through Twitter for those who follow me.
Thank you. And we want to thank you, Drs. Mohili and Dr. Zale, for your great presentations again, and for everybody online who's participating. We wanted to advertise our two next webinars. The first one will be January 14th at noon Eastern Time. We'll feature Kiri Ness and Monica Gramatich. And April 9th, which will feature Luigi Ferrucci and Morgan Levine. So please join us then.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your participation. This was a great webinar to kick off our Cancer and Accelerated Aging webinar series. With that, you'll receive more information for the upcoming webinars, and thank you again.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.